A warm welcome to our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. I'm Amarachi Ubani. You're watching The World Today. Here's what's coming up within the hour. Nigeria marks 25 years of uninterrupted democracy as President Bola Tinubu pays tribute to the heroes of democracy. At least 41 people killed as fire engulfs a residential block in the Kuwaiti city of Mangaf. Plus, Israel and Hamas placed on United Nations list for violating children's rights. The World Today starts now. It is Democracy Day here in Nigeria, marking 25 years of uninterrupted democracy in the country. Until 2018, the day had been celebrated on May 29th. Making his nationwide broadcast earlier today, President Bola Tinubu, who assumed office on May 29th, 2023, acknowledged the contributions of Nigerians who were actively involved in the actualization of the June 12 mandate during the years of military dictatorship, while recalling his role as one of those who midwifed the birth of our current democratic governance and ideals. President Tinubu said he's morally and constitutionally bound to protect it.
We lost great heroes and heroines along the way, and this struggle, the winner of June 12, 1993 presidential election, Chief MKO Abiola, the most significant symbol of our democratic struggle, his wife, Kudirat, General Shehu Musa Yar'Adua, and Pa Alfred Iwani, amongst others, sacrificed their very lives. They bravely surrendered their fortunes so that our nation might have a better one. Let us honor the memories of Chief Anthony Enahoro, Chief Abraham Adesanya, Commodore Dan Sulaiman, Chief Athon Wanko, Chief Chukwuemeka Ezebe, Admiral Ndibusi Kanu, Chief Frank Kokori, Chief Bola Ige, Chief Adekunle Ajasin, Chief Gani Udaudu, Chief Ayo Fasanmi, Chief Gani Fawemi, Chief Olabi Idrojaye, Dr. Beko Ransom Kuti, Chima Ubani, and others who have transited to higher realm. The sacrifices of General Alani Akinriyade, Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, Professor Wole Soyinka, Chief Rap Obioha, Chief Colonel Adebayo, among many others, should never be forgotten. For at least 6 years, they bore the pain and difficulties of life in exile. We could not have won the battle against dictatorship without the irrepressible Nigerian journalists who mounted the barricades along with the pro-democracy activists. We celebrate them today, along with their media establishments, such as The Punch, The Guardian, National Concord, Tribune, The News and Temple, and Tel magazines. The undemocratic government of the day proscribed these media establishments and jailed their journalists for standing for free speech and civil liberties and the sanctity of the June 12 elections.
Staying with the president's address to the nation this morning, President Bola Tinubu also called for a collective commitment to what he describes as the realization of Nigeria's economic democracy, for which he admitted is in desperate need of reforms, promising to always listen to the yearnings of the people. He also highlighted the negotiations with organized labor for a new national minimum wage.
I understand the economic difficulties we face as a nation right now. Our economy has been in desperate need of reform for decades. It has been unbalanced because it was built on the flawed foundations and over-reliance on revenue from exploitation of oil. The reforms we have initiated are intended to create a stronger, better foundation for future growth. There is no doubt that the reform has occasioned hardship. I feel your pains. Yet, there are necessary repairs required to fix the economy over the long run so that everyone has access to economic opportunity, fair pay, and compensation for its endeavor and labor. As we continue to reform the economy, I shall always listen to the people and will never turn my back on you. In this spirit, we have negotiated in good faith and with open arms with organized labor on a new national minimum wage. We shall soon send our executive bill to the National Assembly to enshrine what has been agreed upon as part of our law for the next 5 years or less.
Let's switch gears now to Kuwait, where at least 41 people have been killed in a fire at a residential building in the city of Mangaf. A video shared on social media showed flames engulfing the lower part of the building and thick black smoke billowing from the upper floors. Some 15 other people were injured in the incident. They're being treated in hospital. Many of the casualties are said to be foreign workers who live there. The Kuwaiti Interior Ministry spokesperson, Major General Eid Al-Owahan, said the fire was reported at 6 a.m. local time. Deputy Prime Minister Sheikh Fahad Yusuf Al-Sabah accused property owners of greed and said violations of building standards had led to the tragedy. Over to the United States, where the Biden family is coming to terms with a guilty verdict on son of the president, Hunter Biden, in a gun trial. On Tuesday, a 12-person jury found 54-year-old Hunter Biden guilty of lying about his drug use on a form while purchasing a handgun in 2018. He faces possible jail time following the verdict. While President Joe Biden did not attend the trial in Delaware, many family members, including First Lady Jill Biden, did so regularly. Hunter Biden's wife, sister, and uncle were all present at times to support him during the proceedings. However, President Biden flew to Wilmington, Delaware after the verdict, where he greeted and hugged his son on the tarmac. He said in a statement later, "I am the president, but I'm also dad. Jill and I love our son, and we're so proud of the man he is today." He said he would accept the outcome of this case and continue to respect the judicial process as Hunter considers an appeal. President Biden earlier ruled out pardoning his son, whose trial aired embarrassing details as prosecutors sought to show he was using crack cocaine at the time he bought the gun. Jurors heard from his ex-wife, Kathleen Bueller, and a former girlfriend, Zoe Keston, who described frequent drug binges that took a toll on his friends and family. Text messages detailing his addiction and photographs, some showing a half-naked Hunter Biden, were also shown to the court. The verdict on Tuesday prompted instant political reaction, including from Republicans in Congress who spent years investigating Hunter Biden's behavior and business ties. In light of the verdict on Hunter Biden, President Joe Biden on Tuesday went on to highlight his administration's efforts at strengthening gun laws and increasing penalties for those who violate them. He said this as he delivered an address at a gun safety event in Washington, D.C. Referring to a recent school shooting in Iowa that killed a student and a teacher, the president took a jab at Donald Trump, saying Trump had passed the buck when asked about it. Biden's anti-crime stance reportedly emphasizes the importance of stricter gun laws. In a speech, the U.S. leader highlighted that more than 500 people have been charged with federal gun trafficking and straw purchase offenses under the law of 2022.
We also make gun trafficking and straw purchasing a federal crime for the first time, giving prosecutors a legal tool to charge traffickers and hold them accountable for the more severe penalties that are available. The law strengthens background checks for anyone under the age of 21 trying to purchase a firearm. And it's about time. There's more we have to do there. It's a big deal. Since the law was passed and implemented, the FBI stopped more than 700 sales of firearms for individuals under the age of 21. And about 20,000 unlicensed firearms dealers are now required to become licensed to run background checks, which will keep guns out of dangerous hands. Second, the Act helps stop mass shootings, provides $750 million to states to implement the crisis interventions, like red flag laws that temporarily remove firearms from those who are endangering themselves or others. It also gives $1.3 billion to thousands of schools across the country to build safer learning environments, including updating safety plans, installing security equipment, hiring mental health professionals and school resource officers.
Let's bring in our correspondent in Washington, Maria Bird. Maria, the verdict of this trial is coming just a couple of weeks after Trump himself, the former U.S. president, was found guilty on all 34 counts of payments made to a porn star. Do Republicans feel satisfied the same justice has been meted out on the president's son?
Well, you know, this is, as you said, this is a very interesting point that you're making here, that this is just a few weeks after President Trump. And so how Republicans are feeling, I think that unfortunately this is becoming a political back and forth. And we know that the current president's son, Hunter Biden, has been in the news, has been, confronted with legal challenges almost since the beginning of his father's administration. So this is not a surprise, I think, to many. Will the Republicans use this as a part of the campaign cycle? Most likely, yes. And so the question now is that with these 3 counts that he has been convicted of and found guilty for, what will be next? And it's expected that sentencing could potentially happen within 120 days.
Yes, and Biden's case is just a little different, though, from Trump's. He purchased the gun in 2018 while under the influence of drugs. Why is it so important he faces a law for what was possibly not a crime and not seen as a crime back in 2018?
Yes, you are correct. And obviously, as you have mentioned, this is going back in time. And so obviously someone has taken it upon themselves to research, to figure out if he was actually being truthful in this background check. We know that background checks have become ever more important as part of the gun purchasing process. And it's being stated that he was not truthful on that background check when he talked about his uses of drugs previously or currently. And also when he purchased the firearm, it stated that he actually was under the influence and did have a drug addiction problem at that time. And so that, again, is also against the law. And so those are the 2 areas that they are stating that he broke the law when they go back and look into his response on the background check, and also his drug usage during the time of owning the gun.
And as you speak about background checks, I remember former President Barack Obama did try to implement those gun laws, running those background checks on the purchase of weapons. How is it the law did not come into effect in the case of Hunter Biden when he made the purchase?
Well, it's self-reported. And so if you self-report that you are not under the influence or you do not have a drug addiction problem, then typically that information is filed. And so that's where they're saying that he was not truthful in his responses, because there is no actual test that's done, whether it's a blood test, whether or not it's some more other sort of test, cognitive test, to ensure that someone is not under the influence during that background check process.
President Biden, his father, says he will accept the verdict. He'll also not influence the outcome of the trial. This makes Hunter the first child of a U.S. president convicted of a crime and possibly facing prison sentence. How will that reflect on his father's presidency going forward?
Well, I think obviously, anyone will feel like it's a challenge for his father and the reputation and the imagery. But I think the biggest piece here is that this has been going on since his father was running for office. Hunter Biden has been in the news. They have been pulling out different information and obviously different legal challenges he's had. And his drug addiction has been the highlighted area that many have focused in on. So I think this is not news. This is not new. It's just something that I think is being brought up once again as we're entering this re-election cycle.
Speaking of re-election and the elections coming up in November, the two key trials this year set precedents for American judiciary being an election year as well. It is important. Could the outcomes impact on the elections? I mean, Trump's trial and now Hunter Biden's?
This could have major impacts, obviously, on the election for those who are going to see some of the moral challenges that exist between the two candidates. But again, with the president obviously being the one that's convicted, the former president, and the one that's running for election in comparison to the son of the current president, I think those two are very differing issues that I think voters will see as well.
Do Biden supporters think this was politically motivated, Maria?
Well, I think many voters who, especially those who are supporters of the current president, will see this as politically motivated and will potentially not use this as part of their judgment whether or not they will vote for President Biden in this upcoming election. So the political motivation, I think, is very hard not to, at some point, address or even see as a possibility as we look at it being just 2 weeks apart from the president's trial as well.
Thanks again, Maria.
Thank you.
Politics is no easier in Paris, France, where thousands of protesters took to the streets following the success of right-wing political forces in the European Union Parliament elections over the weekend. Demonstrators gathered on the Place de la République square with banners and flags chanting slogans. They marched through the streets of the French capital, also chanting and throwing firecrackers. Police deployed to the scene and began cracking down on the protesters, using tear gas to disperse the crowds. Parliament member from left-wing party La France Insoumise, Louis Boyard, in his address to the rally, promised to win snap parliament elections expected in 3 weeks. The rally was reportedly held without authorization from authorities. Protesters damaged furniture and attacked police officers who were forced to use tear gas, according to the media. The protest broke out after Marine Le Pen's Conservative National Rally Party won in the European Parliament elections on June 10, gaining 32% of the votes. Welcome back. It's to Watching the World Today. The United Nations has added Israel's military, Hamas, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad's armed wing for the first time to its list of offenders for violating children's rights. The three entities, along with Sudan's warring parties, have been singled out for the killing and maiming of children. This was revealed in an annual report by the world body. It is meant to shame parties so that they commit to measures outlined by the UN to protect children. The report says a conflict in Gaza has led to a 155% increase in what it categorized as grave violations against children. The UN verified more than 8,000 grave violations against 4,247 Palestinian children and 113 Israeli children in 2023. But verification is ongoing, with thousands of reports about children dead and injured still needing to be checked. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said the conflict between Israel and Palestinian groups has led to grave violations on an unprecedented scale and intensity, notably in Gaza. Meanwhile, the UN Secretary General says it's high time for a ceasefire in Gaza, urging the unconditional release of Israeli hostages. He was making the comment at an urgent humanitarian response for Gaza conference. Just this week, the UN announced it was backing a US-backed plan for a full and complete ceasefire in Gaza involving the exchange of Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners. The resolution passed with 14 out of 15 members voting in favor, with Russia abstaining. U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield stated this sends a clear message to Hamas, noting Israel's agreement to the deal. Mr. Guterres highlighted the importance of making all routes into Gaza operational, especially land routes, to facilitate aid as mandated by Security Council Resolution 2720, and stressing that efforts to accelerate and expand the aid mechanism through the Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator are crucial. The final statement from the Emergency Humanitarian Response Conference called for an immediate and durable ceasefire in Gaza to be fully respected and the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages and all civilians held unlawfully. It also demanded an end to the ongoing operation in Rafah and the implementation of interim measures as indicated by the International Court of Justice.
It's high time for a ceasefire along with the unconditional release of hostages. I welcome the peace initiative recently outlined by President Biden and urge all parties to seize this opportunity and come to an agreement. And I call on all parties to respect their obligations under international humanitarian law. This includes facilitating the delivery of humanitarian aid both into and inside Gaza, as they have committed. All available routes into Gaza must be operational, and the land routes are absolutely crucial. I also welcome all coordinated efforts to fully operationalize the mechanism to facilitate aid into Gaza as mandated by Security Council Resolution 2720. The work of the Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator to accelerate and expand the rollout of the mechanism remains critical. I commend governments and people across the region and the world for supporting it. Ultimately, the solution to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is political. The only way forward is through a political solution that opens a path to sustained peace based on two states, Palestine and Israel, living side by side in peace and security on the basis of the pre-97 lines and the relevant United Nations resolutions, previous agreements and international law, with Jerusalem as capital of both states.
On to the Russian invasion of Ukraine now. The country's defense ministry has announced Russian troops have taken control of the settlements of Artemovka in the Luhansk People's Republic and Timovka in the Kharkiv region. Senior press officer for the Zapat group of forces, Leonid Sharov, confirmed this in a video message. He says, or she says, during the fighting that Ukrainian forces suffered losses of more than 560 servicemen, 5 vehicles, a Krab self-propelled artillery unit, M777 and D30 howitzers, as well as 2 electronic warfare stations and 2 artillery ammunition depots. Ukraine has not commented on the claims, but the armed forces says in a statement 37 military clashes have taken place since the beginning of the day, and the Russian army had conducted around 500 shelling attacks on Ukrainian troops' positions and populated areas. It's going to be another hot summer in Greece this year. Recent rise in temperatures have had tourists and residents of the capital, Athens, sweltering in the heat. The National Weather Service has issued a weather warning of a heat wave forecast. What to do in the meantime? People are cooling themselves at fountains, carrying umbrellas, or using hand fans and looking for as much shade as possible. The Weather Service issued an orange alert warning stretching across the coasts of Africa, and the central Mediterranean will progressively shift eastward, reportedly leading to high temperatures from Tuesday to Friday. June 12 and 13 are projected to mark the zenith of the heat wave, with temperatures anticipated to surge to 40 to 41 degrees Celsius and even as high as 42 to 43 degrees Celsius in specific regions, encompassing Athens and Attica.
Sun cream vitamin water.
Yes.
And for lunch that you eat something salty.
Yes.
To keep the level up.
Yes.
But further than that, no. Why?
Keep eating, keep drinking.
I mean, it's pretty hot. It's most of this is for protection from the sun, skin cancer kind of thing.
Pretty similar to
Utah.
Yeah, like it's not as wet as I thought it would be. Like a little bit drier heat, so it's been okay. Harder with kids.
Yeah.
It's not any better across continents to Asia, where residents of Jiangsu in China are trying to protect themselves from the sun, wearing long-sleeve shirts and using umbrellas. Citizens say it's so hot, temperatures are in their 40s sometimes. According to local media reports, the Henan Province Meteorological Observatory issued a red warning for the first time this year for high temperatures. It's also reported that the heat wave might last until June 19th. Malawi's late Vice President Solos Chilima will be honored with a state funeral, so says the government. President Lazarus Chakwera announced 21 days of national mourning starting yesterday. It comes after the wreckage of the small military plane carrying Chilima and a former First Lady and 7 other people discovered in a mountainous area in the country's north. The late 51-year-old Chilima had been vice president since 2014, having served a first term in the role under former President Peter Mutharika. Chakwera previously said there were 10 people on the plane, but the government now says 9 were on board. Everyone was killed on impact when the twin-propeller aircraft went down in a hilly, forested area in bad weather. The victims included former First Lady Shanil Zimbiri and ex-wife of former Malawian President Bakili Muluzi. 6 passengers and 3 military crew members were also on board. Let's cross over to South Africa, where former South African President Jacob Zuma's party has asked the country's High Court to stop the newly elected National Assembly from sitting for the first time on Friday. It's a key date because that is when members of parliament are due to vote for the president. However, Mr. Zuma's Umkhonto weSizwe party is boycotting the session, claiming there were irregularities in last month's general election, although it's not been proven, and there's no evidence to support this. Mr. Zuma, a former ANC leader, is an ally turned enemy of President Cyril Ramaphosa, who is seeking a second term. Ramaphosa is a leader of the ANC, which lost its parliamentary majority for the first time since it took power at the end of the racist system of apartheid in 1994. The ANC won 40% of the vote, but not enough to govern alone. Meanwhile, the recent report titled A World of Debt, published by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, shows that rich countries and organizations that were previously sending grants to Africa as official development assistance have now resorted to lending instead, worsening the debt crisis that African countries face. Africa's debt grew from an average of 30% as a ratio of gross domestic product in 2010 to over 60% currently, while most developed countries have a debt to GDP ratio of less than 40%. Our South Africa correspondent, Innocent Semosa, explains further.
Africa's debt has surged alarmingly over the past decade, skyrocketing to over 60% currently. The implications of this debt burden are far-reaching. But what's driving this rapid accumulation of debt in Africa, and what does this mean for the region's future? Economist and co-author of The World of Debt, Giovanni Valencisi.
What's driving this is a combination of factors. First of all, what we are seeing is that African countries have been hit harder than other developing countries and then developed countries by the fallout of the cascading crisis that have recurred in the last few years. From COVID-19 pandemic, even though there was a growth slowdown, it lasted longer than in many other regions.
Balancisi emphasizes the need for coordinated action at both the domestic and international levels in supporting African countries to effectively manage their debt burden.
So in terms of African countries, I think clearly there are priorities related to a prudent macroeconomic policy, greater transparency, both in terms of use of money, but also in terms of, for example, consolidating debt. Now, when it comes to the international community, what we've called for is, I would say, a free-fall agenda. First of all, the international community should ensure that countries in need have greater access to liquidity in a situation of crisis, so that countries are not forced to borrow just to face an emergency.
He also shed light on some of the trends from the report.
Africa's debt has been on a worrying trajectory. Well, it's affecting everything from economic growth to social development. And it goes without saying that there's a need for African governments to essentially prioritize sound fiscal policies in order to enhance debt transparency. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Innocent Simosa, Channels Television News.
Our new report by the United Nations has found that the biodiversity and the carefully balanced ecosystems of oceans is being increasingly harmed by the impact of humans. The United Nations Education, Science and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, says the world has been treating the oceans like a free-for-all and that this needs to be stopped. It says climate change is disrupting life in our oceans, which are facing multiple hazards and are being harmed by pollution, acidification and loss of biodiversity. With submissions from 100 scientists from around the world, the report aims to sound the alarm on what UNESCO says is new data on threats to the ocean.
It's loss of oxygen, there is acidification, there is sea level rise, of course, causing effects on coastal communities and coastal systems. There is deterioration of blue carbon vegetation in the ocean. There is a steady and strong growth of pollutants that relates to plastic, but also other chemical pollutions. The world has agreed to protect 30% of the ocean, but it's important to protect the right places, so you protect places where there is actually life to protect. And we know, and this report demonstrates, that 70% of the threatened species in the ocean actually take refuge in marine protected areas.
We'll hang around Nigeria for just a bit. The Lagos state government says it aligns with the urgency for actions in mitigating the effects of climate change and championing adaptation initiatives at the local and international levels. The state deputy governor, Kadri Hamzat, made this comment at the opening of the 3-day 10th Lagos International Climate Change Summit, where he launched the Lagos Climate Adaptation and Resilience Plan and Lagos Climate Change Mainstreaming Strategy to reduce emissions and mitigate the climate change challenges. He says government understands the issue of climate change is not a distant threat, but present reality that requires immediate solutions.
The Deputy Governor of Lagos State, Mr. Kadri Hamzat, foreign delegates, former Governor of Lagos and the former Minister of Works and Housing, Mr. Babatunde Fashola, environmental experts and others converge on the Lagos Continental Hotel, Victoria Island, for the 10th Lagos International Climate Change Summit.
We create a renewable energy product paper.
All concerned stakeholders are here to discuss the effect of climate change in Lagos and how the government is championing local adaptation initiatives to sustain the state, which is being highlighted by the State Commissioner for Environment and Water Resources.
Celebrating a decade of climate change summits, we have witnessed a transformative shift in global consciousness towards climate action. We are determined to mobilize resources at an unprecedented scale to finance the transition to a low-carbon economy and support those most vulnerable to the impact of climate change.
The Consul General from the Kingdom of Netherlands, Michel Dielen, says now is the time to take drastic decisions that will address climate change.
We talk about Eco-Atlantic and how that, with such technology, by the way, but how that protected Victoria Island. Yeah, wonderful, but look what happens down the coast. Many houses in Lekki, for example, will flood because they are built on a lower space, below sea level. Even without climate change, that is a problem. The beauty of this is that all these things can be solved.
Mr. Babatunde Fashola says climate change is triggered majorly by human conduct and sometimes natural causes that can be mitigated.
So the problem at Okwaja as being connected somewhat to the defense of Victoria Island. Nothing can be further from the truth. Coastal erosion is a real-life issue. So protecting one place doesn't necessarily mean it is transferring the problem. It just means that more work needs to be done. So as we have finished work in the defense of Victoria Island and Ikoyi, I think what will require funding support is the reactivation, if that is the right word, of the plan to construct more groins, because those were the tools that we deployed then along the coastal way.
The summit provides an opportunity for the Deputy Governor to explain the steps taken to build a waste-to-energy plant that will provide electricity in the state and electricity vehicles on Lagos roads.
For us in Lagos, it's about what do we need to do to sustain and to build a resilient city. If you build and you don't leave 15 meters to your drainage, it will go. And we have no apology. It's not about where you come from or the God that you worship. No. It has to do with us living well so that for the collective good of everybody. We just had an agreement with a Netherlands government. We signed an MOU giving them 2,500 building around the Ekpe, some building and a 2,000 ton daily of waste to convert to energy. That's moving progressively.
The Global Sixth Assessment Report, AR6, of the IPCC serves as a reminder of the urgency to act against climate change and mobilize climate finance for projects that will safeguard the state from natural disasters.
And we're still marking Democracy Day as 25 years of unbroken democracy is celebrated in the country. There are ongoing discussions regarding how the system of governance has shaped our national life. The Platform Nigeria, a special program of the Covenant Nation, is one that has provided that opportunity for eminent leaders of thought to reflect on the reality of our current situation. At the 36th edition of the gathering, which took place in Ikeja, Lagos, speakers dissected the relations between democracy and the free market economy as it plays out in Nigeria.
25 years of uninterrupted civil rule in Nigeria and the commemoration of the 31st anniversary of the annulled June 12, 1993 presidential election certainly constitutes a significant milestone. Happening at a period of an unprecedented economic downturn, the 36th edition of the platform seeks to explore how far the practice of democracy and free market economy has impacted on the nation's current experience.
That is a very important point.
The hall is packed with an enthusiastic audience comprising political and religious leaders, media executives, as well as businessmen and women. The convener, senior pastor of the Covenant Nation, Poju Oyemade, opens the discussions, highlighting the significance of the gathering.
Today represents the day where historically it said Nigeria had its freest and fairest election. And from that struggle of June 12 came the birth of our democracy today. We want to honor all those who gave their lives for this cause. There were people who died fighting to make sure we have this.
Perhaps they need to then be rewarded equally
The first speaker takes up the subject of the free market economy with a creative bread analogy and how such a commodity affects an average Nigerian.
Bread is an essential part, meaning that in life, if your inability to access what to eat is a major problem and dilemma for people. That's why the national bread can never be enough. It cannot be enough because the bread itself is not enough to share. But when you then have a system that is not a free market economy that allows for demand and supply to happen, that allows for value creation to take place freely without the intervention of somebody somewhere with a piece of paper and a pen, letting these people take a lion's share, of course, they will always get a shorter end of the stick.
Mrs. Titi Oshodi.
For the Special Advisor on Climate Change and Circular Economy to the Governor of Lagos State, business sustainability is critical in positioning citizens to play in a free market economy.
The interplay between free democracy or free market and democracy is settled within the space of sustainability. I stand and I operate in an industry that is for sustainability, for sustenance, for longevity. So it's important that from our office, the three pillars by which we drive is produce and help you see, help you to navigate where there's opportunities for job, where there's opportunity for market, where there's opportunity to access to wealth as well.
And despite the country's huge endowment in human and natural resources, the chairman of the editorial board of This Day newspaper, Olusegun Adeniyi, believes much remains to be done in terms of the economy.
Most Nigerians have not been availed of their fair share. For all its human and material resources, Nigeria's GDP is still among the lowest in the world. Food inflation, which is currently about 40%, is not only frightening, but also brings the risk of social, economic, and security turbulence. So while periodic elections are good, if because of the choices we make, most of us still find it difficult to put food on their table, there's a problem.
Beyond celebrating the freedom from military dictatorship, the various speakers here are of the consensus that a true democracy is one which delivers equity and justice for all and provides the enabling environment for the full expression of individual potential.
I told him this in Gige.
Buc-ee's travel center in Luling, Texas has become the world's largest convenience store after opening its doors to the public on Monday. The 75,000 square foot complex will snatch the record away from another Buc-ee's Sevierville, Tennessee, by just 300 square feet. According to reports, the travel center in Luling will now have 120 fuel pumps and will hire 200 employees.
That's insane. So just the impact it's going to have on travelers going through the area from Houston to San Antonio and vice versa, I mean, it's going to be massive. Plus, I mean, there's a lot more brisket here, which makes it even better. You can't leave without something that says Buc-ee's or you are Buc-ee's. So you can actually buy a onesie, you can do everything. It's like the country version of Costco. There's a little bit of everything out here for everyone.
It's a great feeling that the Buc-ee's is finally the largest one here in Luling, Texas. It's a great part that the governor has come down here in Luling, and I think it's bringing more jobs here to the state of Texas.
It's super exciting, of course, like we're able to do this and be able to fund it and everything, but overall it's just a nice little gem that we're able to have the biggest Buc-ee's in the world. It's bigger in Texas and we proved it. We got the biggest Buc-ee's.
Finally on the program, hundreds of locals and visitors flocked to Diezhao village in Fushan, Guangdong in China on Saturday to witness the town's traditional 500-year dragon boat race. Various crews preparing their dragon boats for the race drifting along the narrow waterway amid a lively atmosphere created an enthusiastic spectator A spectator crowd. The winning crew was awarded a trophy in recognition of their magnificent skills throughout the competition. Unlike traditional open water racing, Diezhao racing takes place on the narrow 6-meter wide channels of the Shentang River with 25-meter longboats navigating tight turns, drifting and reversing with precision. The river is approximately 650 meters long with a challenging stone a challenging stone bend known as Kaoshi Corner. Teams of 30 rowers carefully maneuver the boats around L and S-shaped bends where any mistake could result in an accident. The 2024 edition of the Diezhao Dragon Boat Race attracted 18 teams and will be held from the 8th of June to the 11th.
Opposing a Bloomberg challenger, Tahoe Senior Morgan Stanley Red.
Jupiter! Be cute! Be cute!
Morgan Stanley Red.
So we've been paddling since February. It's quite challenging. I mean, we do practice once a week, but recently we've ramped it up to twice a week. Early morning, 8 to 10. You know, quite a big task for someone who's in corporate. I'm feeling great. We just got off our semifinals and we finished second. So we'll be going to the Gold Cup finals, which is for the first time in history. So at Bloomberg, at least at our company. Dragon Boat Festival, it's very meaningful because a lot of people, come together from different athleticism level. A few people don't really play sports growing up, but this is the sport where everyone could participate and have a good time. And a lot of teams are flying in internationally, so it's a good way to meet people actually as well and celebrate.
Different types of people from different backgrounds, I think, coming together for the love of the sport that they're doing, which is obviously racing boats, and lots of equipment, lots of paddles, lots of all of that, and sand, and of course water, so yeah.
And that's the world today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.